Hello, guys. Can you please confirm that you can actually hear us? Please say hi. Hey, no, Nick. Hi to you. Yeah, guys. Hello and welcome to our something's. Hey, Lucas. Hey, something's going on here. No, it's all fine. Hey, guys, and welcome. I really hope you have a great day so far because we are definitely going to improve that right now, right, Brian?
You'd hope so.
Yeah,
We'll do our best.
We definitely will do our best. We have something, in my opinion, really special and really cool prepared for you right here. And I will switch to the screen so you can actually see it already. And it is quite amazing, in my opinion. You can see mountains and stuff from Brian. You should be able to see it in the stream now. Brian, what are we actually doing today? Because we kind of announced this world creator thing, and you know, as soon as you go to worldcreator.com, you see those amazing terrains and you know, things and pictures. So for people who don't know what the world creator, what the software is, can you explain a little bit more what this is about?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably fun to tell a little bit of a story. So when I came to Crytek in 2017, I was totally new to game engines, and when I realized what it could do, that it was a world building tool, one of my first obsessions and enduring obsessions was, well, I want to make the real world, right? I want to have the Grand Canyon, and you know, like, are you kidding me? Like, I can take places that really exist on Earth or Mars or fantastical places and reconstruct them in the engine and then light them any time of day I want, and fog, just it's totally addictive, right?
Yeah.
And I started off trying to work a lot with real world height map data. And it was a long learning process. My colleague Nick did a seminar on it, I don't know, a week or two ago. And he moved a lot faster with it than I did, but he's also more sensible than I am, because I was literally trying to take like the Grand Canyon, which is huge. It's like I wanted mountains and that kind of things. Well, mountains turn out to be really, really big, kind of too big for a playable height map terrain. And we have some very nice terrain sculpting tools and that sort of thing, but I think it's safe to say no one in their right mind should probably try and create really realistic terrain with any terrain sculpting tools. I don't know Substance. I don't know if they have something that is kind of appropriate to this task. I'm not a Substance user, no pun intended. But yeah, trying to create realistic erosion patterns, and that's the sort of things that make the terrain look the way it does. That's a lot of sculpting. You'd be there forever. So along comes tools like World Machine and World Creator, which essentially create procedural terrain according to algorithms that include things like erosion patterns. So even before you get that far, the basic sort of construct in World Creator, what they call your base shape here, which starts with this. So this setting right here. Do I want to make a canyon? Let's see if my thing. Oh, I've got all kinds of complicated stuff in here. Let me make an entirely new default project here. Okay, here we go. So the first thing I'm usually going to do is come here to this style of what they call the base shape. And you can start off with things that are going to be familiar to you from the real world. So if I'm mostly interested in having a canyon really feature going through my terrain, I want to start with that. And then I can vary everything there is about it, how deeply the river has cut into the terrain, to the rock. You can put random seeds and just generate a bunch of shapes. You can click this literally random thing here. You see there's no end to these seeds. But essentially this tries to mimic real world features. So if I want to have a mountain, essentially a mountain, there's the basis of some kind of mountain. And if I want to start to make that much more specific, there are things called filters that I can add, and I can also define biomes. So if I really had sort of an extensive world, what's that beautiful game with the kind of sweeping flowing robes? You're just kind of going through the landscape and you end up high in the mountains at the end. It's kind of simple. It's not low poly, but do you know the game I'm talking about?
So there are multiple games that might be referring to, but I think the one you have in mind right now is Journey.
Journey, exactly.
Uh,
I knew there was a connection to you since
yeah.
our CryEngine. You of all people would remember it. Yeah, Journey is a gorgeous game, and if I remember correctly, you end up it starts off kind of in the desert, and you essentially go through what you might call biomes, and you end up high in the mountains at some point, and there's sort of snow and blah blah blah. Well, you can define these biomes in World Creator. That's one of the ways you can work. So down in the lowlands, you might want to have something swampy with sort of low shrubs. You might want to have some desert areas. You might want to have mountains and some steep slopes, some grassy meadows. All those things can be defined separately, and then you can apply textures and that sort of thing. And then, yeah, I don't know. I it's hard to talk about it generally without getting into the details, which we'll do. But the bottom line is that the algorithms are based on the way that terrain gets eroded by anything from earthquakes to rain to snow. Uh, I suppose asteroids too, because you'll see one of the things I have here is a crater. So I could also make the moon, or I could make some kind of impact crater or multiple craters. Yeah, and then eventually I would export this as either typically a height map, which is just a black and white image, of course, and then bring that in and use that to create the playable terrain area in the engine. Or you can also export this as meshes, and I'll get into why that's actually pretty useful. In the end, you're going to end up with a lot more realistic looking terrain than you could by hand sculpting it, unless you are one heck of an artist with a lot of time in your hands. And I did play with World Machine way back, and it's a very capable piece of software. In fact, we've used it internally for a number of projects. But it's very, very different from World Creator, which I guess tries to be a bit more naturalistic and sort of real world oriented. Whereas World Machine is sort of like visual scripting. You have nodes and you connect them. If you've used Blender, you have sort of similar node-based editing, feeding things into inputs and outputs and that sort of thing. Both capable of making great things. I don't know what the state of the World Machine software is and how much it's maintained these days because I haven't looked into it in a number of years, but it's still out there and can create some cool stuff. And sorry if I sound a little bit hoarse today. I have been sick for over a week with our old friend COVID. Finally caught up to me, so I'm still recovering. So forgive me if I mute and cough at various points.
um, yeah. Also, Pakadi, thank you for your follow. So,
Still there?
sorry, I think I had. Yep, yep. It's fine. Sorry, I'm back. I just had some technical issues. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I will
Happens.
yeah, pass it back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, so what I'd like to do today is sort of look at some of the ways that I've been moving between World Creator and CryEngine, and it's still very much in the testing phases. I'm sure there are hopefully going to be people that sign on today that are real World Creator users and maybe know a lot more about it than I do. For example, though I've done lots and lots of height maps, and any of my levels that you've seen in my tutorials over the years, those have all been created in World Creator. And that was the 2018 version, which I'd been using for years. And the folks at World Creator were kind enough to extend us a temporary license to 2022. So this is the latest and greatest, which is a very, very different beast. So I'm still pretty new to this version. It's extraordinary and capable. It's a very different way of thinking, and it's taken me some searching to find the buttons that I used to know by heart, but it has a lot more capabilities. Um, yeah, so I think what we should start with is just creating a simple height map. So I'm not going to do textures and that sort of thing. The first level that I had open there, I did spend some time creating materials and applying them in all the amazing ways that you can. So if you're just interested in creating beautiful screenshots within World Creator or exporting things for film purposes and that sort of thing, you might want to create materials in there. So I took, for instance, Quixel textures, all my albedo, my normal maps, all that stuff, super high resolution 8K textures. and you can come in here and create materials. And for example, come down into texturing, open up these texture slots, and then click and browse to something like this. So you can still, yeah, you're still seeing my screen here. So
Mm-hmm.
for example, here's, should be a pretty capable texture. Let me find something a little more interesting. Yeah, here we go. So you see it, there's a preview of what it looks like, all perfectly lit, everything. And every map that you could possibly want is there. So I'd start with my albedo. And the first thing I'll need to do is change this scaling because it's not scaled very realistically. So now it's much, much, much smaller like that. And you can see the patterning. It's still one of the things that I don't understand yet about this new version is how to scale that even further. So even unless I've got a pretty small height map, this is actually not small enough. The tiling's going to be a bit too big. But anyway, I can keep building on this and plug in my slots. There's a naming convention that it expects, and you can see when I grab the normal map, it automatically recognized the roughness and ambient occlusion maps and already dropped those in. And apparently my displacement map, if it exists here, yeah, isn't following the expected naming convention, so I have to manually go grab it, but that's no big deal. I can vary how much effect the normal map has. There are various projection options. And then what's really amazing, kind of related, well, very much related to what CryEngine does. In our terrain editor, paint layers, you can filter where terrain materials can appear by altitude and by slope. And 99% of the time, I found that's enough. However, since we can add erosion patterns and this sort of thing to that, we can add these distribution methods, and you'll see all of these options which go way beyond merely altitude and slope. Sun direction, which way water is flowing down the hill, insane things connected to the biome. Yeah, I'm not here to teach World Creator, and I'm not really an expert in this yet. But suffice to say, you can create all these amazing materials and apply them in really terrain specific ways. However, maybe someone knows out there, but I cannot figure out a way to bring that over to the engine because it's not a matter of creating the materials. Obviously, I can take these exact same textures, create materials, and then I can paint them on the terrain in CryEngine, as you all probably know how to do. But if I do all that work in World Creator and use all these other fancy methods, there's no way to preserve that I've yet to figure out. And I'm hoping to kind of get into a conversation with the World Creator folks and see if there's some way to do that, to kind of burn it in, so to speak, as maybe one giant texture, and then be able to just kind of bring that over. Anyway, so we've got these things. Then we have something called filters. And let me find them here. Always mixing them up. Yep. So this is where things really get interesting, and you even get real-time previews. So you can see the difference between what I had by default, and if I go to something like a ridged filter, I get a different kind of erosion pattern here. If I want terraces, this kind of thing, if you've ever been to Yellowstone Park in Wyoming and poking into Montana a little bit in the United States, you see terracing going on because of all the, I think it's calcium, I guess, because of all the hot springs and very unique things. You can have patterns that are created by strong winds. And then probably one of the most recognizable things that is really going to get you excited if you're into the idea of realistic terrain is just simply erosion. And these can get really specific, and you'll see these types here. So thin flows is one of the immediately sort of most impressive, where you can get the sense of softer sandstone or something like that, and erosion patterns happening there. So these filters are extraordinary, and there's no end to the customization. For instance, the rain levels. Don't even ask me how this really works. Some simple things like the length, how far do these sort of erosion things extend before they start to peter out? That becomes pretty obvious quite quickly. It's just extraordinary. How much evaporation was happening? Are we in a dry climate or a moist climate? So you could base all these things on a real place that you had in mind. And I think that's the real beauty of it. The other thing that this program lets you do, so Nicholas Gillen a week or two ago showed how to work with real world data, like from Terrain Party or any number of sources out there. Well, one of the amazing things about this version of World Creator is you can buy a license to, what is the name of the program? Map Tile. And it has a direct connection to global height map data. So you can not only incorporate your real world height map data directly in here to build your model, you can mix stuff that's procedurally generated with that. So I think the beauty of that is it's all well and good to say, well, I want my game to take place in Yosemite Park. It's got dramatic landscape. I'm going to make a climbing game or something so it makes sense. But if you want the player to sort of navigate through the level and you need to kind of carve out the terrain of that level so that they're sort of guided through, or the game has a flow through there. Even if it's an open sandbox game, you might want to sort of define a few paths because you're going to put goodies, collectibles, enemies, etc. along those paths. Then you could take Yosemite as your starting point, but then carve paths along there, add canyons, remove canyons, change the height of mountains, so you can combine that real world data from MapTile with procedurally generated stuff. And in terms of modifying this, so if you go to any one of your biomes, you can click on this guy here, and this brush lets you customize this base shape, which is exactly what I'm talking about. And as soon as you turn this on, you see a grid. So let's say I wanted to carve sort of an entrance into this crater like this. So I'm kind of grabbing these tiles. If I hold down the Shift key, I can simply come down here and lower that area of it. I kind of overdid it there. Let me come back a little more gently, something like that. And if that's too wide, you can change the scale. Where the heck is it? Here we go. So I can subdivide this to be very crude, like this, even like this. Or I can, if I want to make a very specific canyon, something like this, I could do that. So there's no end to the ways that you can sort of carve out these starting points, whether they came from real world data or procedurally generated. Is this making sense?
Yeah. I also had kind of troubles with doing that, with creating like my own shapes, but this is like, this is more for artists, and this is a bit complicated in my opinion, on doing that. But you have so much freedom in creating your own shapes, right?
Yeah, and what I found, I mean, this create base shape tool, this is not super refined. Even if I make this grid pretty tight, to be frank, I would probably more often than not use our road tool in the engine. So I would bring this into here, and now I'm in the game world. I've got it imported, as I'll show you in a minute. And if you've used the road tool or the river tool, it doesn't matter. They're based in the same spline tool. I can carve a passage through there and fill it with water, add a water volume to it. I can use it to, add a road, but I don't have to do either one of those things. I can simply use either of those tools to align the height map data to points that I can change the elevation of and position of, and even the angle. So I could create a slope like a banked curve. I'm sure you guys know this if you played with the road and river tools. And so those are a lot more flexible and precise. Especially if you think in pieces. So rather than using one giant road tool to create a spline through the whole level, I suggest that you use smaller pieces because you can't vary the width except across the entire road entity or river entity. So if you want to have kind of a skinnier canyon in parts of it and a fatter canyon in other parts, or a river whose mouth opens to the ocean and gets wide, you want to use separate pieces of that and just overlap their endpoints. Does that make sense?
I
So
think
it's a
so.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, those tools, I can show it to you when we get into the engine. So those tools are more flexible than what I know so far about these custom base shapes. But nevertheless, it's amazing. Super, super cool. Okay. Yeah, well, it doesn't really matter. We can use what we've got here. And let me think if there's anything, is there anything in particular you want to see here while I'm in here? Or should we just import it and see how it looks?
I would definitely like to see that in the editor right now.
Okay. So I'm going to ignore materials because I'd have to create my own materials in the engine anyway. I have a bit of erosion. I have a crater, so I have the essence of an interesting game. And we can kind of continue with our idea of carving some paths into the craters, or maybe even carving a tunnel into it. That would be really cool. So here's one of the first important things, just some general tips about using this program. These real-time renders that you're seeing right now with the lighting and everything can be slow. This is a fairly simple model right now, so it's pretty snappy. But one or a couple suggestions for speeding up performance in here. You have something called fast render mode, which just looks like this, and it's much, much, much faster than the full render. So that's something to keep in mind. If you go into settings, this also has ray tracing, if I remember correctly. And I remember seeing the number of bounces can be controlled in here. Maybe it's under lighting. Yeah, maximum light bounces. The default here is actually 10, which is a lot of bounces, actually. That's a lot of ray tracing. And that's one of the things that kind of slows it down. So you might want to reduce that to just a couple. And yeah, I'm trying to think other things. So the other thing is, this is a big difference between previous versions of World Crater and 2022. I went looking for the height map size because in the past you would just choose it very similar to our engine. I want 1K, 512, 8K, etc. And you're not going to find it. And it's hidden under this precision setting. So at the default of 1 meter, the height map is always 1K. It's 1024 by 1024. The export tab is right here. It looks like save, which I find mildly annoying. And if I want to export a height map, I have to add an export preset. And then click on this guy, and I'll explain about the formats. But you're going to get 1024 as long as this precision is set to its default. However, you can go all the way up to 8K. If I choose an eighth of a meter precision, which I'm not going to do because it's been crashing, that will give you an 8K output. And I'll come back to that a little bit later when we make a more complicated model. So 1024 is fine for us if I want 512 meters, I would choose this. And then this is another way to speed up your performance. So if you look at this, kind of ignore the texture, this isn't a super detailed terrain right now because my precision is set pretty low. If I quadruple this by coming up to here, do you see the details in the erosion? It's a lot more tight. If I come down all the way to a 4K height map, up and there it crashed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me start it up again.
Have you also tried to so there's a function that can make things easier where you just deactivate all the lighting?
You mean the quick render, fast render?
Yeah.
Yeah. You can actually turn the sun off. So all these things here, you can turn off the sun and get this kind of look, which also includes the sort of fill light from the sky, which is actually quite nice in this program. A couple things I really suggest for speeding up performance that are a no-brainer. Turn off the clouds. Unless you're doing a render within World Crater, you're not going to want to have the clouds and the ocean on. It's really pretty. It looks great. It does water reflections, all kinds of sexy stuff. But it's not really useful when you're essentially just trying to carve yourself a nice piece of terrain. So yeah, those things can be turned off. It even does this cheesy pseudo fake Gaussian blurred depth of field thing. Okay, so anyway, I've got my height map. I've got to choose precision first. So this is going to give me a 4K height map, which is more than we need for test purposes. So I'm going to go back to the default. And I'm going to go to my export tab. Again, I have to add some kind of export preset. You can define your own export presets. I've created a couple here, and you can add those. So the first thing you need to know about coming into CryEngine is you absolutely must use RAW. So it took me a long time and a lot of headaches to track down what was going on because, as Nicholas demonstrated in his live stream, he was exporting TIFFs, or he was grabbing real-world height map data from TIFF files, which is a very common thing. Sometimes you can get JPEGs, but TIFF can be uncompressed, so it's kind of a preferred format, and it needs to be 16-bit. However, when you go and export this into the engine, there's a problem. And I'm going to actually show it to you so that you know I'm not making it up. We only need a single channel because this is a 16-bit grayscale image where brightness is height. Black is 0, which is the lowest point our terrain supports. And white is whatever the max height you set in the engine. I'll get back to that in a second when we import. Super, super important setting is auto normalization. So if you turn this off, you get a very flat looking height map. Don't ask me why it's red. One of the options here is to have the red channel, but it just insists on showing everything in red by default. So the advantage to turning off auto normalization, which is start at black and go all the way to white, use all the tones from black to white, is that you can define your own min and max heights. But frankly, I don't understand why these look the way they do. When I set my min height lower, I actually get farther from seeing a black. It's really weird. Another little tip, if you go to this obscure little button, GPU info at the bottom of the toolbar, you will actually see supposedly the maximum height of the terrain, which is only 61 meters. So my range of my terrain is actually 80 meters exactly right now. So if I want to make it look the way it does in the engine, the way it does in World Creator, I would literally want to go from 0 to a max height of 80, because I can't have negative numbers on my terrain and in the engine. So I would go from 0 to 80 meters and it would look the same as this. And we'll test out the theory. However, this normalization, not using normalization, it just is very weird. And I don't, maybe someone can explain this to me. I kind of don't get it. So I'm going to use auto normalization to get as much detail, enough, in other words, as much difference in tones, which is going to translate to as much detail in the height map as possible. Does that make sense? And this game engine, sadly, we're not listed here, but it makes no difference. Not yet.
Not yet.
We're working on it.
Yeah.
Okay. So only one other thing, you can export the entire height map, and it's going to be 1024 in this case. But a really cool thing is, later on I'll come back and say, well, I want to actually have a playable terrain of 1K, but I want to continue to have mountains in the background. Well, you can only have an 8K, I should say only, it's ridiculously huge. You can have an 8K by 8K, 8 kilometers in each direction height map in the engine at maximum. You'd spend the rest of your life trying to fill it with trees and decals and stuff to make it look real. So it's probably not something a lot of people are going to do, but it is possible. But it is more common to not want the height map to just stop at the edge of the world. And one way you could do that is to say, I'll say, pretend this is 8K or something. I'm just going to take this middle section, and that's going to be my playable terrain. So to make sure it's actually dead center, the math would be 384. So I'm using a quarter of the entire area as my playable terrain. And then the rest of this stuff I can export as meshes. And I'll show you an example of this. So right up here, I would add another technique for exporting, or another export preset. And this time I'd choose mesh. And what I would suggest is use OBJ. FBX would seem like the more obvious choice, but for some reason, when I tested this, and I'm sorry, World Creator, it's my fault, but the FBXs were coming out with 0 vertices, 0 polys, and I don't know why. But the OBJ import works perfectly. So I could take this tile and export selected. So I could export that and then shift this over 384, export another one, etc. However big you want your tiles to be, it just depends on how many polygons they have. If I exported an entire height map like this as a single mesh, it would have 2.5 million polygons. It would be unusable. I tried it. So you definitely want to make tiles. So if you get your scaling right, you can bring each of those in as a mesh. You don't even need colliders if the player's never going to move over to them, not going to be allowed to walk on them. And then put the terrain height map in the middle of that. I hope that makes sense. But for now, what I'm going to do is export all. And so I'm going to change this to my default, 1024. Change these to zeros. And if you want, you can go ahead and select a folder. Otherwise, it's going to end up in some default folder. I think I'd already defined this, but I'll show you my top secret terrain folder here, and I just organized them by resolution. So this is going to be a 1K resolution height map. So that's where I'm going to export it to, and I'm going to say export all, and it's going to be pretty quick. You still there?
Mm-hmm. I'm listening.
Okay. Uh,
So
uh, I don't know. Is that Simone
yeah, yeah, yeah,
from
that's
Discord? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm curious about you say an unrealistic dream would be to integrate these erosion patterns to the terrain. That's completely realistic. That's exactly what we're doing here. That's exactly why you'd want to use this program. Okay, so let me go and find that folder. Here we go. And while I'm in World Creator, because I actually do not want to run this at the same time as the engine, it may be a little bit dicey. Ah, it's still exporting now. That's weird. That's very strange that it's that
It's
slow.
still exporting.
That was weird. Okay, and I'm going to also export a raw, and I'm just going to spoil the end of this story and tell you use raw. There is a problem in the engine right now exporting bitmap files that other than raw for terrain, and I'll show you what it looks like here in a second. So this is not going to make any difference. None of this other stuff makes any difference, but raw 16-bit little Indian is the method you're going to want to use. I'm going to go ahead and export that.
Oh, it's still
That's
exporting, right?
yeah, that's strange how slow it is. While we're waiting for that, you can it has naming conventions, automatic naming conventions, so you can just type a name in here. For instance, if I wanted to export a bunch of tiled meshes for background mountains, I could call it Mountain One or Mesh One, Mesh Two, Mesh Three, etc. This is very strange that it's so slow to export this. Not like I really have anything else running.
Also, Simone says, well, I wanted to terrain generated at runtime with the engine. I don't think that will be possible, right?
No. Well, I guess theoretically you could load a fresh height map, but it wouldn't be from an infinite list. In other words, I think what you're talking about is something similar to literally generating random procedural terrain at runtime in the game. Is that what you mean? And I don't think you can do that with Sandbox at runtime. At least I don't know how to do it. I guess in C++ anything is possible. But I guess my question is, what then? If it's randomly generated terrain, how would you dress that terrain with anything to hide the texture tiling? How would you apply all your paint layers? How would you put, decals on there and vegetation and that sort of thing if it's a brand new piece of terrain? I'm just going to call this crater. Save that for later. And let me get my engine started. Hence why it's an unrealistic dream. All right, well, don't blame us. Yeah, that's truly playing God at an unprecedented level, I have to say. And I love the idea. That would be truly amazing. I mean, if it was like desert sand dunes, it's kind of achievable. You know what I mean?
Is
Like
it though?
you theoretically. Well, I mean, you wouldn't. It's maybe other than randomly then taking and spawning some blowing sand particle effects at various points, like on ridges, at the tops of ridges and that kind of thing. You wouldn't necessarily have to dress it. Um, and then I guess you could just spawn, dynamically spawn things on the height map. So it's not impossible. Okay,
Interesting.
so let's get this party started. I'm going to create a new level. I'll call this crater. Click OK, and I'm going to leave it at 1K resolution because that's the height of the resolution of the height map that I'm importing. Give it a second to load up.
Sorry.
My machine is not the fastest machine in the world, truth be told.
Yeah, yeah, it's fine, it's fine. But yep, there it is.
Okay. My handy dandy tools and packages are on another screen, but I'm going to turn off the volumetric clouds for the moment and give us a decent environment preset that doesn't have high noon in the desert, high noon at the equator kind of lighting, something a little more dramatic. Should do. Okay, now comes the important parts. I guess I do need to apologize for this. Change my tool layout. God, so many versions of the engine.
Oh, I know. Oh, I know that feeling.
Forgive me. You guys are lucky you only have to deal with one at a time. Let's just say things have moved around a bit in the recent versions. Okay, so terrain editor. Most important step in this version of the engine anyway. You have got to come to the edit menu and set terrain max height before you import. The default is 1K. So if I imported this height map right now, as I'm sure you've seen, we're going to get a cube 1K horizontally and 1K high, which will look absolutely absurd. You remember that our crater was 80 meters of terrain? So if I'm going to test my theory and see if this actually works and set the max of 80. And now I'm ready to import. So file, import height map.
It's a small crater, right?
Shortcuts there. And so first I'm going to test my, where did it go? Where is my crater? Ah, defaults. Yeah, default names. Crater 1K. Call this the same thing. So I'm going to try the TIFF file first. Okay, and there it is. Looks pretty reasonable. I can obviously set my ocean height, but here's the problem. This is a bug. This should not be happening. That detail did not come from World Crater. And for a while I thought it was World Crater. I thought there was an export problem or something. I was losing my mind over this. And then I realized I had been seeing the same thing on real world height-map data. So unfortunately, this is an engine bug. And what Nicholas did is really your only option, which is to either hand smooth these areas or just come in here to this edit menu and just say smooth. And you may want to do it a couple of times, but you're throwing away detail, and you're throwing away bad detail and good detail. So all this lovely erosion is getting watered down because you're averaging the height map points. So great. And I'm sorry about that, but there is a solution, which is to simply use a raw file. So I'm going to re-import, and this time I'll use the raw, and it will work perfectly.
Yeah, it was indeed an issue. It was quite annoying to have this Minecraft things going on here, but yeah, we are investigating that issue.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be fixed in the next version.
And check
Anyway.
the Minecraft exporter.
Yeah. So there it is with all our beautiful terrain. And just I loaded up Game SDK simply for a sense of scale. So I'm going to go ahead and save, make it full screen, and spawn myself into the game so that you can get a sense of what this feels like. And you can see, even with 80 meters of height, this is a pretty steep thing to climb here. But you know, it's a pretty big piece of terrain. This is the same size as the Hunt universe. 1K of terrain is not not that
huge.
small.
It's huge. Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you start decorating it. And even if I run, here's running speed. You can see it's going to take a long time to get around the perimeter of this crater, and the diameter of it is only a small percentage of this thing. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening here. And then, of course, I would come in here and do some terrain painting. Just for a quick fix, I'm going to come in here. Hello. Do I have something funny going on here?
What's going on?
I don't know. It's not. It should be. There it is. That was weird. Anyway, I'm just going to assign one simple material to the whole thing. Here's one of my go-to quickie terrain materials. Just this kind of it's one of the better ones in terms of not showing grotesque tiling, unlike some of the others. So it's a quick way to kind of paint your terrain. Okay. Yeah. So in terms of then what you might want to do with it once you've got it here, if you're happy with the height, that's your crucial factor, because you're essentially reinterpreting that height map data. It was normalized, so it went from from black to white. So in 16-bit color space. That's 65,536 shades of gray, which is very nice detail. But you're reinterpreting it here. So if you go too far with this, you're going to get, unwalkable terrain, but also just absurd looking terrain. And I'm sure you've all seen that. So if I wanted to kind of mess with this and modify it, let's say my idea of carving a road, like a path for the player to walk on or to drive on, I'm going to go to my Create Object tool under Miscellaneous, and it doesn't matter, road or river, it's the same spline tool. And I'm going to turn my snapping to terrain on, but I'm going to pull a little trick. Let's say I wanted to kind of create a meandering path here. First, I need to turn my helpers on. There we go. And I'm just kind of very quickly create a crude path. By the way, you probably already know this trick, but the defaults mean that your helpers are quickly going to disappear as you move away from the terrain. And when you need to zoom way, way out from the level in order to see a very large spline, you're not going to be able to see anything. So the trick is to make these numbers much bigger like this and turn off hide and shrink like that. Okay, so anyway, back to here. Let's say start here. And I'm going to ignore the fact that there's a mountain here, and I'm going to end up kind of crossing over the ridge. If I was making a truly walkable thing, I'd probably wind this path a little bit lower and lower as I go, a little closer to the center. Do you know what I mean? And then double click to end it. So now the trick is there's a couple ways to modify this. If I truly wanted to carve a canyon through this, essentially all I need to do is move a couple of points. If I wanted a flat path, which is usually what you want in the case of a river, because even though rivers flow downhill, our rivers need to be flat for them to work properly. And you can do that literally by using the scaling tool. So if you select this thing and just take your z-axis and scale this way, 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 way down, if I look at this, now all my points are essentially at the same level. That's not what I want to do in this case, though. I'm going to undo that. I think I undid too many things. Yeah, there we go. Okay, what I'm going to do is actually come in and edit this spline. So I'm going to go to Properties and Edit Spline, and I'm going to select one point at a time here. It's going to disappear beneath the terrain, so you can either turn off camera terrain collisions so that you can get down beneath it here, or you can go to wireframe view with Alt W so that you can see underneath the terrain. I think I'll use wireframe. And I'm going to just bring this point down. I need to turn off my terrain snapping, otherwise I can't get below it. And literally I'm going to use that to carve a canyon. And you may be wondering what the heck I'm talking about here, but you're going to see it here momentarily. I'm not going to bother to make this super realistic and precise right now. That's good enough for now. So I can either make a hole in the height map and put a tunnel. I'd need to have some kind of mesh down there because otherwise I would see this. I'd be under the terrain like this. I don't want the user looking up and seeing the unrendered side of the terrain. And to do that, I'd simply take the terrain editor, sculpt, and make holes. And I can literally find wherever my guy is entering here and just make some holes in it. And then again, I just need some kind of mesh. So that's one option, make a tunnel. In this case, I want to carve a canyon though. So I'm going to take my road and I'm going to make it a bit wider. So I don't know, let's say 20 meters wide, something generous like that. And then the trick to this whole business is align height map. And what that does is move the height map points to follow the road, to follow those spline points. So now I've got a canyon carved right through my height map. And I've got a lovely road carved into the side of it. If you've done much of this, you'd know that you'd want to actually slide these points inward so they cut into the cliff before you do that align height map thing, because otherwise what you're doing is lifting up ground as if it was filled in with a tractor, pushing up to support it underneath here, and it actually makes more sense to take points like this. Oops, that's not what I meant to do at all. Talking and chewing gum at the same time. What I wanted to do was edit, select one point at a time, and simply slide it so it carves into the side of the mountain or the side of the hill like this. I double-clicked accidentally. Impatience. Be a little bit tricky to do from a distance. Something like this. And now when I go to align height map, I'm carving that flat path into the existing mountain. So I'm only taking away, I'm not building up underneath it. Does that make sense? You get this kind of nice wall going on there. It's a pretty fancy road for a crater. I don't know who wants to live here that they're interested in paying for the road, but there it is. And the thing I was talking about earlier, if you don't want the whole thing to be such a consistent width, which is probably true in most cases, use little short roads and just overlap their endpoints. So that allows you to make each one of them its own width. It has its own border width. You can change the tiling if you're actually planning on putting a material on there that's supposed to look like a path or a road, etc. Use lots of little bits of road that overlap. Don't use one giant road. Is this making sense so far?
Yeah, and it does actually look really good.
Oh my God, time flies.
Yep, right. Right?
Yeah, it's already. I thought I was going to have enough to fill an hour, but okay. Any questions from you or anybody floating around out there? I'm not watching the commentary.
So the terrain painting and vegetation tools in CryEngine are what make me think my procedural terrain idea isn't entirely impossible. Those tools work really well in C. Well, the thing is, I want a volcano now, says Jericho.
Oh, who doesn't?
Who
Come on, we
doesn't?
all want our own
Yeah.
volcano. One that erupts.
So Simone, to generate terrain dynamically. I think you can brute force that with code, but you
Yeah,
have to
I'm sure
you have to reload the level each time. I don't think that would be possible, like on runtime, in your level. That I don't
Yeah, it's
think.
really interesting. I think with code it's doable. I just don't know about using the procedural terrain generation. Not that the procedural terrain generation in CryEngine is so great. It's not. It doesn't have erosion patterns, and it's not random actually. So whatever numbers you plug into the parameters, you'll get exactly the same results every time. You'd need to use code to generate random numbers to then plug into that random generator. And if you wanted it to look realistic, then you'd need a whole different set of algorithms similar to what they've done in World Creator. But yeah, that's a great idea to always have like a fresh thing. It'd be great to tie into like an API in World Creator or something, if you could license such a thing to create really realistic terrain. Like, gosh, I don't know if I have this level. One of the things it does really well is sand dunes. It doesn't look like I have one in here. I have it elsewhere.
Yes.
Let's open up another level.
Yeah, sand dunes.
But yeah,
I was like, I think 2 years ago or something, I was obsessed with creating just simple sand dunes in CryEngine. That was,
yeah,
yeah. Oh,
yeah.
oh,
Not
but
an engine so much.
but this looks amazing.
Yeah. So this is created in World Creator, and the base shape was a canyon. And all I did was then move the ocean up a bit, so it's kind of feels like those islands in Thailand to me, or like the start, obviously without the biomes in place. But you have kind of beachfront here, and this is a 4K height map, so there's a lot of detail, and I think I put
Can you
I
actually
put some
like,
just to give you a sense of scale. Yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
can you actually like create, or like in the editor, can you create like an 1K map and then put a 4K height map into it?
Um, yes and no.
Okay.
I guess the correct answer is no. Actually, it looks like I downsampled this. Resize terrain. No, it is 4K. But why am I only, I guess this is a vestige, a leftover vestige. This thing is floating around in outer space. But just to give you a sense of scale on this height map, there's that satellite dish that's in our asset database, which is 70 meters across. It's quite huge, and you can see that there's a lot of world around there. Most of it's underwater, actually. So, for instance, let's take this same World Creator height map, and let's try to import it into a new level. Go ahead and save this. Or we can open up the level we just had, since it's so handily available, which is a 1K level. And if you try to do this, it's going to say, nope, it has to be exactly 1024 by 1024. So the kind of question here is resolution. So when you did the new level dialog, it prompted you to choose your height map size, but you can always change your mind right here. So if I resize this to 4K, what's going to end up happening is I'm going to have 1024 of this beautiful detailed crater, and then the other 75% of my world is now going to extend off in the positive X and Y directions and be totally flat at the default height of 32 meters, I think.
Okay.
I believe that's what's going to happen. But what that now allows me to do is import a 4K height map into here because I've made a 4K world. But that's not necessary if I literally want 1K of playable terrain. There it is. If I literally wanted 1K of playable terrain, but I had this beautiful 4K height map I created in the world creator, there's a solution for this. So I'm going to go back to resizing this, but I'm going to change my units to 1/4 of a meter per height map unit. So each pixel in the height map image is 1/4 of a meter now. And so my total size is going to end up being, I can't talk and do this at the same time. On my total, I'm confused. Okay, yeah, exactly. So I have the resolution of the height map set to 4K, but I have meters per unit set to just 25 centimeters. So the end result is automatically calculated, and my playable terrain will be, again, 1K. But I can actually import a height map that's super, super detailed. When I have terrain height map points every 25 centimeters instead of every meter, that means that smoothing algorithm that essentially imposes spline curves, pseudo splines, to blend from height map point to height map point only has to do it, at 1/4 of the resolution. It has 25% of the smoothing job to pull off. I hope this makes sense. If there was no such smoothing algorithm, we would just have Minecraft. We would just have every meter or whatever our resolution was set to, we'd have a new height map level. So it would literally be Minecraft without the smoothing. And in fact, the terracing bug that you see when importing TIFF files, I figured out, I think what's happening is that the math is ignoring the 16-bit data and treating it as 8-bit data. Not that any of you probably care, but it seems to be what's happening. Okay, so just to test this out, I'm going to go back to File, Import Height Map, and I'm actually going to choose one of my 4K height maps. I can choose that canyon that you just saw. I think it was Canyon with Islands. Sort by date. Yeah, let's try this one. And even though this is a 1K level, it's going to import it because it's actually 4K of height map data. And yeah, well, this isn't exactly the same level, or it is, but I didn't set my max height, so I'm gonna make it much higher, 512 meters, and then re-import, and we'll get considerably more dramatic results.
It's loading. Oh yeah. Okay. Dramatic result.
I think it's a little too dramatic.
Yeah.
A single canyon. Yeah, it's like Yosemite. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, but it's still amazing. I mean, it's very realistic looking stuff. I need to regenerate my terrain textures, but yeah, that's the idea. Let me show you before we run out of time, because wow, time is going fast. An example, I think it's this one. So what I did here was, back in World Creator, I changed my precision to 1/4 meter or 1/4. So then I had a 4K height map, right? But I just selected a 256 meter square in the middle and exported that as a height map. And then everything else here, these are just meshes. So if I just walk through them here, do you see each one of these as a separate mesh? And then I just kind of...
It's just chunks of meshes.
Yeah, they're just pieces of the original height map in World Creator, and they're essentially going to act as background mountains. Now the only thing is, something is flipped, and I wanted to have this all perfect for you today, but I just ran out of time, and so you can see the edges don't match between this and this. I think it's partially a problem of the height range isn't a match, but also there's flipped things here somewhere, and I just haven't had time to figure it out. But we've done this in a showcase level that you'll end up seeing at some point, and created background mountains. And you could go on and on and on with this, particularly in the upcoming release of World Creator, because they're going to unlimited resolution, which is kind of mind-boggling. So you could literally have mountains that go on forever in the background. You'd obviously want to scale down the poly count. You'd want to bring them into your DCC tool and lot them down, because the player should never be allowed to get anywhere close to them. They're off the playable terrain area, so that means physics is not fully functioning out there. So you'd need a way to keep the player from reaching those background mountains, but they could look incredibly realistic. The trick there is going to be textures. How do you texture them? But you don't need much resolution. You can have really low resolution textures when this thing is like, 2 kilometers away. I mean, shockingly low resolution, particularly if the colors make sense. So if you have kind of green grass in the valleys, rock on the steep cliffs, snow on the top, people will totally buy it. It will be. You got to remember, there's only so many pixels on your screen, even on a 4K monitor. So you're not going to be able to tell by the time something is that far away. So that's a kind of a crude example of another use you can put World Creator to export meshes as well as height maps, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I think, man, to be honest, I just, saw some pictures. I will pull up now in a second. Wait a second. What you can actually create, what you can do with World Creator, and it's just freaking amazing, in my opinion. I will just.
Jericho asked about a Quixel importer for CryEngine. I mean, Quixel makes textures, and I don't know, the importer, the kind of automation would have to be in Photoshop because of the way we use our channels.
It's a bit different. It's a bit different.
You'd have to follow a naming scheme or look at the Quixel naming scheme, find the normal map, plug that into, I don't even remember which channel it is. There's a lot of tutorials we've put out there on how to, which channels, which textures go on which channels. But that would be like a Photoshop action, actually.
The thing is, we also have to be kind of a little bit careful with the licensing thing at the moment. Since, other engines do own Quixel.
Yes. One of those companies who shall not be named snatched up Quixel. It must be nice to have that much cash. But, can't say as I blame them, because it's an amazing thing. So these are all things people have made with World Creator. I'm kind of curious whether they rendered them in World Creator. I know some of them did, but if some of them went into Cinema 4D or other beautiful renderers.
I mean, to be honest, the one I just pulled up, right? I really want to look into it, because the thing is, you could use EmberGen, right? You could use EmberGen. You can turn EmberGen stuff into FBX stuff. I haven't tried it yet, but theoretically, it's possible to use EmberGen and create those clouds and put them into CryEngine. Okay, you have to texture the mountains, but I still haven't figured out how to texture stuff in World Creator. But
this texturing is easy. Like this snow texture is just applied by altitude and also by slope, so it's not on the side of the cliff. That's not hard to do at all.
But having this good looking textures, I think you would need a third. You would need Blender. Right?
Yeah, I don't. What do you mean, the rock?
Yeah, the rocks. Yeah.
No, you just need good textures. Like, let me show the example again that I started with today. These are all Quixel textures, so they're all 8K textures. They're really beautiful. Take a second. Hello? Rock isn't rendering there. So, and sometimes this is a bit wacky with the mouse. So you see this is really beautiful. This icy parts of this snow texture. If you get down really close, you'll see this very nice high resolution Quixel texture. There's kind of grass and leaves. However, it's not scaled properly. So if you zoom out, you'll see those leaves are way too big for what would be, they're like man-sized or person-sized
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
more
yeah.
appropriate.
They're huge.
Yeah, but anyway, they are gorgeous textures. Down here, some beautiful mud, really, you know, gorgeous 8K textures. So yeah, you can get them looking really good in there. And also, this is a nice render. It's got ray tracing. It's got some good stuff in there because it doesn't have to be real time. Um, yeah, so I people are doing some beautiful renders in there, but you know, for us, we make games. We want to get this stuff into our engine. That's always the goal. And to me, the part that frustrates me is these textures. So I would not go to the trouble of doing all this terrain painting in World Creator. I would create those materials and apply them in the engine. And I don't think I'd be unhappy with the results because I've been doing that way for years. But it's still, it's like the universal principle, the work expands to fill the time, or your appetite, your confidence that you absolutely must have a feature is in direct proportion to the availability of the feature,
Yeah.
even if it's not been shipped yet. So knowing that this thing has the ability to apply terrain textures by all kinds of sophisticated real world parameters like erosion makes me I'm sure that I have to have it. How much difference it'll really make in the long run, I don't know, but I'd like to play with it. But these are endless rabbit holes. You can go down and spend months playing with each one of these things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, okay, guys, I think we can wrap it up. If you have any questions, please, now's the time to ask them. Otherwise, we will never be able to answer your questions again. So that's the last time.
Never, 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 except maybe on Discord.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks to Simone and Jericho for joining us and filling out our chat today, and Mr. Nix, and I don't know who everybody is here, Big Bondi, folks that showed up and chatted.
Interesting, like Simone, I don't know if I can actually talk about, I mean, that was a feature that Vlad was working on some time ago. Brian, if you know what careful.
I think I know what you're talking about, and if it ain't on the roadmap, you probably should not talk about it.
No, but it was just R&D. It was just playing around. It was nothing that we actually planned. You could theoretically, if you have a really good knowledge with Flowgraph or schematic, you could have some generation, like automatic or procedural generation. We also have a feature that automatically generates at least vegetation.
Yeah, we have procedural by terrain paint layers. So I mean, you did an excellent tutorial on how you can really, really quickly paint a level by painting vegetation and rocks and terrain paint materials all at the same time. So.
Yeah, but we also had a feature that I think it was kind of used for Hunt for like a while ago, where you can generate it again every time you load up a level. And you can decide for some vegetation tools to kind of freeze, like for example, some trees, but some things will be automatically generated whenever you load a level. That was a really interesting feature. Back in the days, I was at QA and I was testing it. Yes, it was kind of, I need to research on that because it was kind of nice if you want to have really controlled procedural generation in the editor. I have to research on that. It's really well hidden in the editor, by the way.
Yeah, so now I'm not sure. I thought you were talking about something else because I've seen some amazing procedural things internally that haven't been released. But
no, we needed a feature for Hunt, and we kind of included that into CryEngine as well. But we, didn't talk about it as much. I just remember it because I was testing it back in the days.
Yeah. No, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, I just need to research it a little bit.
Well, anyway, folks, thanks for coming. Test this software out, see what you think. I've been in love with it since I first saw it. It's complicated, but it does amazing things. And yeah, if you want a sense of realism to your terrain, it's just absolutely fabulous. And the fact that you can incorporate real-world height maps heightmap data and mix that with stuff you're designing is just kind of off the charts. So you do have to pay for that map tile license, and they have various plans and that kind of thing. But yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much to the good folks at World Creator for helping us out with this.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. Check the website out. I just posted the link. Prime, thank you. We're doing okayish. Brian is a bit, unfortunately, is a little bit ill. But yeah, it's also
I'm
it's not
hiding it well.
it's not even Monday, but it feels like a Monday. So we getting back.
Well, we had holiday here yesterday.
Yeah. So yeah, guys, I would say thank you for watching. If you have any questions, check out our Discord channel, and I will see you in the next one. And thank you, Brian, for your time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Bye bye.